Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. Opinions on homeless encampments can be bitterly divided, but does a newly proposed bill put too much onus on municipalities to provide alternate shelter? And everyone's favorite gardening guru, Brian Minter, is here once again to answer your calls and emails, and we'll take a look at the ongoing ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. Thank you. I'm Amy Bell, and this is BC Today. And thank you for joining us on CBC Radio 1, live streaming on CBC Gem and cbc.ca/BC, and of course on the CBC Vancouver YouTube page. The Prime Minister spoke about the pause in fighting in Gaza today. He said the truce between Israel and Hamas is progress, but there's more to be done to achieve lasting peace.
Continued to call for a need for lasting peace in the region, including a two-state solution. We know there are going to be many steps along that path, but we've been calling for weeks for a significant humanitarian pause. It is progress that we have that right now, but there are many more steps we're going to have to take on together, and that's exactly what we're doing.
Israel says the truce can be extended if Hamas continues to release more hostages. And as hostages are released, a team of doctors will help them and their families get through this traumatic experience. Earlier today, our colleagues at News Network spoke with Dr. Haggai Levine. They are the head of the medical and resilience team for the Hostages and Missing Family Forum.
Concerned about the health status of the hostages, because we know that many of them had prior medical conditions that are not properly treated in captivity. They were in extreme conditions underground, without exposure to sun, without proper diet, with emotional and mental stress. And some of them were injured when they were abducted. And we are very glad to hear that it seems like from preliminary exam that the 13 released hostages are in good condition, but we are waiting at the Israeli hospitals. And I happen to be here at this wonderful facility in Wolfson Medical Center in Holon to examine and to help them to start the recovery process, which will be very long. And for the families, it has been a very long waiting, 7 weeks. So now they're also trying to heal the wounds. Unfortunately, most families of the hostages and most hostages are not released. We just heard the press release from the ICRC, from the Red Cross, and unfortunately, they did not promise that they will deliver needed medications to all the hostages that remain in captivity. That's something that all of us around the world should demand, that all the hostages will be released, or for the very least, get medications now, because they could die any moment. We are doing everything we can to protect life. And I think this message of humanism, and that's why you, me, and everyone are so excited, are so emotional to see these people coming back to life, coming back to be free. And we should not forget, not for a second, although this is a moment of joy, to forget the other hostages. We don't know their status. They don't know what's going on here. Maybe they saw their friends in captivity being released. They don't know if they are going to be murdered or going to be released. We need to get to them now in order to provide a sign of life and provide them the medical care they need. I must say, with the families of the hostages that are not released, it's very, very difficult. It's very emotional and tight moment for them. They are happy for the others, but they are still very, very worried.
Dr. Haggai Levine is the head of the Medical and Resilience Team for the Hostages and Missing Families Forum. And do follow cbc.ca/news for more on the Israel-Hamas ceasefire. Well, the province has hit pause on a bill that would impact how municipalities can respond to homeless encampments. Bill 45 requires municipalities to prove there is reasonably available alternative shelter space for displaced residents before applying for an injunction to clear an encampment. And it would amend the two charters that outline how municipalities in BC in order to do this. Those are the Community Charter and Vancouver Charter. The bill defines a shelter as a place that allows a person to stay overnight with access to a bathroom, shower, and at least one meal per day. It also requires the shelter is staffed while people stay there. But the contents of the bill have not been met with enthusiasm so far. Backlash to the bill from cities and advocacy groups led to Premier David Eby to halt progress on the bill for now. That is so the government has more time to consult with municipalities. And for more on this, we're now joined by Trish Mandewo. She is president of the Union of BC Municipalities and a councillor for the city of Coquitlam. Hi, how are you?
Hello, Rachel. I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
So why are you and the UBCM generally opposed to this bill?
Yeah, so the proposed bill, as it is right now, requires a local government that is applying for an injunction to provide evidence that there is reasonably available shelter space, as you mentioned, that is to the quality that is outlined in the legislation. And that is problematic for local governments because we have been developing the housing needs reports for years. And the housing needs report have told the story that, shelter beds are needed all across BC. So we don't have enough shelter beds. So if this bill goes forward, there are some unintended consequences, which would be that we will see more encampments throughout our communities.
Now, do you think it's a reasonable requirement to make sure a municipality has suitable shelter space before dismantling homeless encampments to ensure that these people have somewhere they can go?
The requirement is very reasonable, but the caveat here is that local governments do not provide housing. Housing is a provincial mandate, right? So here we are. Now we need to keep our communities safe, and we need to keep the encampments and our houseless neighbors safe. And yet we don't have control of the housing, and yet we can have an injunction to move them if that is needed. That's where the complexity is.
Right. So it's not an issue with the intent. It would be behind the execution of it. But what would it take for cities to be able to provide these types of shelters as an alternative? What is needed?
Yeah, so cities do not provide shelter.
Right.
It is the province's job to provide shelter beds. And as I said, the reality right now is there aren't enough beds in any of the municipalities.
What would municipalities need from the province to make these shelters a reality?
Yeah, so let me maybe tell you a little bit of how the current situation is.
Yeah,
so
please.
Currently, someone without a home has a charter-protected right to shelter overnight in a public park or a space. And municipalities, though, may identify through their bylaws which spaces can be used and for which hours. Municipalities can also apply for a court injunction when necessary. For example, when there's danger, as I mentioned earlier, and there's safety issues, they can apply for an injunction. So our members here are concerned about the legal implications of this legislation. So yes, shelter is needed, but we don't have the mandate to provide it. So what we want as local governments is to be able to keep the community safe, and that is keeping our houseless neighbors safe, keeping the community at large safe, businesses safe. So that's where we need to have that capability to do so. But right now, this bill would tie our hands.
And what do you think the ramifications would be if this bill does go through?
As I said, if it goes through, municipalities are not going to be able to decamp any of the encampments. And we actually, our legal advice has shared that we actually will see more encampments, which is not what we want.
Right.
And I don't think the province wants to see that either.
Cities such as Prince George have been denied eviction powers by the BC Supreme Court, while other cities like Nanaimo have been granted temporary injunctions. From your point of view, do you think there's enough clarity right now on how much power municipalities have when it comes to encampments? Should there be sort of a clearer bar or a more equal measure that all areas have to live up to before they can evict these encampments?
Yeah, so while I can speak for any one particular community, I can speak for the rules that are currently in place.
Okay.
And our unhoused neighbors may seek shelter, as I said, but what we don't want to see is having them, seek shelter in the fields or in the boulevards or in all the parks, right? So what we're saying is let the bylaws of the municipalities be effective. And at the same time, we would love to see the province providing more shelters as quickly as possible. And not only shelters, but housing is really what is at the base of all this.
Okay. The statement from UBCM on this bill says this legislation would limit the ability of local governments to manage homeless encampments. What is meant by this?
Yeah, so really the entire discussion shines the light, as I said, for the far more basic issue, which is that there is not enough supportive housing,
Right.
complex care, or shelter beds for the number of the unhoused people in this province. So until there is proper housing, the encampments will continue to be a reality in BC's communities. And in the meantime, what UBCM is asking for is for local governments to continue to use the bylaws that we have in order to manage the spread of encampments in our communities.
And would you like to see your area and many municipalities get to a point where these encampments are no longer an issue and that these people without homes have adequate shelter?
For sure. That's what is at the base of all this conversation. I think we all agree that the policy objective is for the unhoused neighbors to have homes, not encampments, but homes. And exactly that will be the success out of this conversation. Out of this discussion as well.
But what is the responsibility of municipalities to the people actually living in the encampments? They're there now, and there is no alternative housing provided for them. So what is the responsibility to them and to keep them safe?
I can assure you that in most communities, all our bylaw officers are doing everything they can to keep our unhoused neighbors safe. So the responsibility for the community right now is we have, our police is going in there to make sure that safety is there. We have our bylaws officers that are going in, and a lot of them, you'll be so surprised at how much they actually have the one-on-one conversation with our unhoused neighbors. And I can tell you, even in my own local community, I have seen our bylaw officers and how hard they work to maintain that safety within that community. So that's what we can do. That's what's in our purview. But when it comes to providing housing, we can't. We don't have the capability to do so. That is the province's mandate.
In what circumstance do you think it's justified for a city to ask the court to remove an encampment?
In most cases, while I can speak again of any specific examples, what I can say is in most cases, it's about safety. They're doing so when it's deemed to be unsafe for our unhoused neighbors.
I guess the question is, what do you think the ultimate solution is here? How would you like to see the province and municipalities both work to address the amount of people who are currently experiencing homelessness? Is it possible that this is not a one side should bear the brunt of this? What would you like to see done between the two sides?
Yeah, so Rachel, I'm currently in Ottawa right now, and we just finished doing advocacy days here, and we were talking to the federal government as well about the housing issue. So what I would like to see, I know if I can speak personally, I would love to see the province and the federal government ramp up on that housing, especially housing for our unhoused neighbors. But better yet, all three levels of government, we need to be having these discussions. But specifically here, the reason why we were asking the province to withdraw is because we were not engaged as local governments. So it is critical to make sure that the proper consultation and engagement, not only of local governments and municipalities, but of also the organizations that are serving the unhoused population. We all need to come to the table so that we can inform this legislation so that it can be effective.
Trish, I thank you for taking your time with us today. It is very much appreciated.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, we'll talk to you soon. Trish Mandewo is president of the Union of BC Municipalities and a councillor for the city of Coquitlam. And we will now shift our focus to those helping people experiencing homelessness. Abbotsford's extreme weather shelter is already full before we have even reached December. Jessie Wagenast is Abbotsford's extreme weather shelter coordinator and the executive director of the Sparrow Community Care Society. Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm well. Good afternoon.
So describe for us what the demand is like right now for shelter beds in Abbotsford. It has been incredibly frigid and the forecast looks to be quite cold.
So even heading into the month of November, when we kick off our extreme weather response shelters, every shelter across the city was at or above capacity. This includes shelters for youth, shelters for seniors, and shelters for everyone in between. It includes transition houses. In many ways, we have to include the fact that acute care in our regional hospital is full of people who are still there because they are waiting for a safe place to be discharged to. Under these already full circumstances, we opened up 2 of our 3 extreme weather shelter sites with a capacity for 50 people between the 2 of them. And we have already seen nights where they were over capacity. We normally don't see numbers north of 50 people until sometime in the new year when we get prolonged stretches of cold. And it really speaks to the increased demand this year.
Okay, and I was going to ask you how does it compare to previous years, but you've answered that question. I would ask you though, in terms of at the shelter itself, who makes up most of the demand for shelter space in Abbotsford?
The people who are using shelters in Abbotsford are as varied as the broader population. We see probably about 50, well, not quite 50-50, maybe 60-40 men and women. We see people of all ages. Our oldest shelter resident in the city right now is 86 years old. Wow. And at our youth shelters, they are less likely to disclose. I know that they have people as young as 13, 14 staying in their shelter frequently. We're seeing people across ethnic and social backgrounds. We see people with addictions and mental health issues, and also people who are finding themselves homeless for the very first time simply because they don't have enough money. These people often find themselves sleeping in their cars, at rest stops, parking lots, beside, in highway exit areas. And then the weather dips down to the point where they can't afford to keep the heat running in their car because that requires burning gas. So they find themselves in our extreme weather shelters as well.
And you mentioned some people that are finding themselves in these positions for the first time. How are they finding themselves in these situations? Is it just the rising cost of everything? Is it unemployment? What is your take on things?
From what we're seeing and what we're hearing from the people who are using the shelters, it's a simple affordability crisis when it comes to housing. And I know this is something that if I could echo what Trish was saying, the previous guest, housing is the only thing that's going to bring us out of this crisis. We cannot shelter our way out of a housing crisis any more than we've been able to naloxone our way out of an overdose crisis. We need to be getting straight to the root cause, which is simply that people do not have somewhere to live. We have homes and apartments, multifamily units in Abbotsford that have doubled in rental costs in the past 5 to 6 years. Well, your disability benefits or CPP or old age security, guaranteed income supplements, these benefits have moved, but they've often moved by 20% or 25%.
Okay.
So the cost of housing is the number one driver by far in increased shelter use.
And what sort of focus is there on, building affordable housing in Abbotsford right now? What have you observed, say, in the last year?
Like other municipalities across the province and indeed across the country, Abbotsford has been working steadily with our provincial housing authority, which in our case is, of course, BC Housing, to identify sites for modular housing, for permanent long-term supportive housing, for increasing shelter capacity. We really are starting to see some of the multitude of announcements that have come from the province, from municipalities, and sometimes even from the federal government around housing and shelter. We're starting to see some of these projects actually be breaking ground and coming to fruition. So I have to say, in the last year, there's been more movement than we've ever seen in the past. But again, the horizon, the timelines on these things are not keeping pace with the immediacy of the need of demand.
Yeah. The provincial government's proposed Bill 45 would make it tougher for municipalities to clear encampments unless shelter space is available. As we spoke with our last guest, what do you make of the proposed bill?
I have been working with people who are living homeless in Abbotsford here for a long time. And I can tell you, there have been many times where people have been evicted from encampments after an injunction has been sought, and they have been moved into far more marginal situations than they had previously been in. So to that end, I'm 100% in support of the province's legislation, and I look forward to seeing how the province is going to support municipalities to fulfill that. I think ultimately what UBCM wants, what the province of British Columbia wants, and indeed what we as service providers and of course the service users, what we all want is safer places for people to live. And so we, like your previous caller said, we are going to need all hands on deck on that.
Right. All right.
Bill 45 is not a solution.
Okay. That is all the time we have today. Jesse, I thank you so much for joining us. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Jesse Wagenast is Abbotsford's Extreme Weather Shelter Coordinator and the Executive Director of the Sparrow Community Care Society. Now, the top 3 reasons people cite for needing to use a food bank in BC are in order: cost of food, low wages, and cost of housing. Next Friday, December 1st, is the 37th annual CBC British Columbia Food Bank Day broadcast. It's a day we devote to special programming to raise money for food banks in BC. There are 107 of them right now in all parts of the province, and I will tell you how you can make a donation in a few minutes. But first, here is the story of how one woman came to find herself at a food bank.
My first interactions with the food bank was actually donating my time. I volunteered for 2 years at the Richmond Food Bank, and when my own circumstances changed, I found myself on the other end of things. My daughter and I were both diagnosed with celiac disease, which meant we were restricted in what we could eat, and the cost of the certain foods we had to eat increased, and I didn't know how to navigate that. So that's when we first started to use the food bank. And when I felt like we had figured that piece out, we stopped using it for a long, long time. I had 2 more children, and then my marriage fell apart. And that's when I started to use it again. I was amazed when I was on the other end, on the giving end of things, when I found out the buying power that the food bank has, that because the food bank's working with corporations and companies that can lower the costs and purchase more food so that every donation goes so much farther than for someone standing in a grocery store. My hope for my kids is that obviously they grow big and strong, and the food bank enables me to be able to make them fresh, homemade food that's safe for us to eat, and to spend that time with them, teaching them how they can feed themselves in a way that is safe given their specific dietary restrictions.
Now, there are so many different circumstances that contribute to fellow citizens having to use a food bank in this province. And if you are able and willing to make a donation to the food bank of your choice in BC, you can do so right now or at your convenience at our secure online donation site, cbc.ca/foodbankday. On the site, there's a drop-down menu that allows you to select which food bank you would like your donation to go to. And if you're not sure, there is a choice at the bottom of the list for greatest need. Sometimes the smaller food banks in the province, typically run by volunteers, don't have the resources to fundraise like some of the larger food banks might. On Friday, December 1st, there will be a special edition of BC Today planned from noon to 3 p.m. Michelle will be joined by Margaret Gallagher of North by Northwest, and house band Jack Garton and the Holiday Spirits are sure to get you into the holiday season given mood. And we will also welcome the Vancouver Youth Choir and Haley Wallace, an upcoming singer and songwriter originally from Klemtu, a small island community enclosed by BC's Great Bear Rainforest. And this year, you can listen to the program on CBC Radio and also watch the live stream on CBC Gem or at cbc.ca/BC. And add next Friday, the December 1st, to your calendar, and the 37th annual CBC British Columbia Food Bank Day. And coming up next, it is Minter Friday, so you can take the guesswork out of your gardening and call or email Brian to get the answers to all your questions. That is right after the CBC News with Robert Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. Vancouver police say there's been a sharp decline in the number of unprovoked stranger attacks in the city. In the first half of 2021, during the height of the pandemic, there was an average of more than 4 a day. But that number has now dropped to about 1 a day. The VPD believes there are several reasons for the improvement, including the justice system keeping offenders in custody longer. Rogers Sugar says it has asked for a mediator as an 8-week strike at its Vancouver sugar refinery drags on. A statement from the company says it has applied to the BC Labour Relations Board in the hope that mediation can break the impasse in the contract talks. And craft breweries say they are struggling with rising prices. Ken Beattie of the BC Craft Brewers Guild says of the 240 breweries in the province, about 15% might not survive another year. Callister Brewing here in Vancouver is one of those closing its doors. The company blames higher costs for ingredients, packaging, and rent, as well as higher taxes. And now the forecast on the north coast. A few showers this afternoon with a high of 8, highs reaching 4 and mainly sunny in the Peace. In the central interior, mainly cloudy with a high of 0, highs to 3 with some sunshine in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, clearing this afternoon with a high of 3 as well. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria, and the Fraser Valley, sunny this afternoon with highs around 8 degrees. I'll have more local news at the top of the hour. Now back to Amy with BC Today.
Robert, you got any big
Amy,
weekend plans?
Just thinking about playing some tennis, maybe.
Were you thinking of doing any winter gardening?
No winter gardening.
Now,
No,
did you
I have
have
to rake some leaves.
You have to rake
Does
some
that
leaves?
count as gardening?
I don't think that's as creative as we were hoping things would get.
You want me to be creative?
Well, yeah. Don't you ever like to do like a little sort of seasonal, like put some like
No, I
evergreen
don't.
boughs up by the door, maybe some holly berries?
No, I bet Brian Minter does.
That is exactly what Brian Minter does, and that's what he's going to talk about. I was just hoping
Fantastic.
you might be
No.
in on that.
No, not in on that.
Okay, well, me either. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, and welcome back. And thank you for joining us on CBC Radio 1 and live streaming on CBC Gem, cbc.ca/BC, and on the Vancouver YouTube page. And there is a definite chill in the air these days and frost on the ground, and it's beginning to feel a lot like maybe Christmas or at least winter. So it is time to take down your summer baskets and gather up your seasonal boughs and berries. So what do you want to know? What's your question for Brian Minter? You can call us 1-800-825-5950 in Metro Vancouver, 604-669-3733 or pound 690. And you can email us today at bctoday@cbc.ca. Now, Master Gardener and Horticulturalist Brian Minter is our longtime gardening columnist on the show, and he joins me now from Country Garden Limited in Chilliwack. Hello, Brian.
Amy, hi. It's a pleasure to be you. What a beautiful day, right? Almost
Gorgeous.
Throughout the province right now. It's not seasonal. But in any case, the way the world is going right now, we all need a bit of a lift to lift our spirits and so on.
I
and,
agree.
We're finding in our industry, the horticultural industry, that people are going back to traditional things, which is they're buying red poinsettias, they're buying traditional colors and so on, things that are Christmassy, that they remind you of the season. They want to be something more natural. And that's why so many of us have, I guess, an old porch pot, a container on the deck. We have an old moss hanging baskets and so on. And, Amy, by simply gathering up, and that's why I always encourage on CBC during the summertime, hey, there's some plants you may want to consider putting in your garden that you can go and just harvest the branches and so on, but which are great. But one of the most important is getting the right type of green. I love pine. Pine is great, and if you live in an area where you have white pine, even better. And most garden places do have a whole array of seasonal type of greens this time of year. But depending on how cold you get, you may want to have some of the hardier ones. White spruce, for example, the true noble fir. Some of the white fir is very, very good. But particularly the white pine, which are soft blue needles, which are so great to work with, and they stand up in the cold. But most of all, we have their traditional red cedar that is so nice to put around the outside. Now, that'll give you the backdrop for the greens, but there's a couple of things that people have been doing that really make a difference. If you can get some birch stems, and believe me, they're widely available, about 3 or 4 feet long, and you put basically a cluster of 3 in a high, medium, and a bit of a lower state in the middle of the container, that pure white with the green really shows things off. And the biggest thing, and these are hardy right across the province and right across the country, that is a holly, but it's a deciduous holly. The nice thing about them is when the leaves drop off, as they did a while ago, you've got these bright red berries that really, amongst these birch and amongst the green stems, add so much vibrance and color. They're absolutely great. They just pick it up amazingly well. And then cones. A lot of us have trees around. They fall on the ground to pick up cones. But the secret in that is to make sure that if you can just take a little bit of white paint on a piece of newspaper and just roll the cones on that, they get the beautiful frosted look. When you put the cones in this mixture, it really adds so much. It really does. Now, a couple things. People say, oh, I've got to have to get oasis and so on. No, you don't, actually. Wet soil, if you've had the container in a dry spot, drying out, rehydrate it. Soak it really, really well, because that's all you need for right through the entire winter season, is to have those branches. And of course, I love the soil. It's got weight, so it'll stop the wind from blowing the container around. But the weight will also, and the moisture inside, be enough moisture for the greens that will last right through the Christmas season, which is absolutely wonderful. It really is.
Yeah.
So very simply, and hanging baskets as well. And I mentioned to you, too, we always want to think of wildlife and whatever we're doing today, but the birds in particular, the little berries that we put in, it's a bird favorite. They love these berries, so not a bad thing.
Nice.
But in some of the containers, people are being really creative and putting some bird feeding stations. They put the little saucer with bird feed in. So where we're allowed to feed birds with the avian situation, we have to be careful right now. But it's a nice place to be able to do something. So you've got an environmental container. Everything's renewable. We've taken something that's natural, looks good, lifts our spirits. How can we not lose on this, something like this? And people are doing it right across the country. I never see it when watching the CBC News at night when they're doing something in downtown Toronto or another country, city in the country. I'm always looking at the background, and they've got these beautiful winter containers, which we could do.
I always have winter container envy around my neighborhood. Some people just they have the touch. They do so well, but I got to step up my game. I've been taking notes of what to put in frantically while you're talking.
Please, that'd be great. Okay.
I do recall being on that white paint duty for pine cones when I was a little kid with my grandmother. That was my job. I may have been a bit too enthusiastic, but
I think a bunch of us were involved in that.
those were some very frosty pine cones.
They were.
Well, you know what? This all sounds wonderful, and I love that just as my summer baskets were looking so sad, that we can transition right into something more attuned to the season that will last right through Christmas. And of course, Brian is here to answer your questions. You can call us at 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Email us bctoday@cbc.ca. And Brian, we already have a couple of queries for you, so we'll check in with Ben in Vancouver. Ben, I believe you want to know about your bamboo hedge.
Yes, I do. Hi,
All
Brian.
right.
Hi, Brian. I really appreciate all your notes and always enjoy listening to you. It's a great pleasure.
Well, thank you.
To get your help. I've got a nice bamboo hedge that's now about 1.5 years in the soil, and it's grown in nicely. It's a Fargesia Campbell species.
Yeah,
and
that
I've got
should
your
be a zone 5 hardiness on that Fargesia, so you should be okay for winter.
Yes. So my question around that, though, is, part of why I picked it is because it's supposed to have these really nice upright stems and beautifully that you can expose. I'm wondering, because it's kind of growing all over the place, when would I trim back the stems and the lower leaves to expose the larger stems in behind the lower part of the plant?
Yeah, Ben, I'm glad you brought that up because a lot of folks are wondering about the same thing. How long have you had the hedge now?
It's about 1.5 years in the soil.
About 1.5 years, okay. Nowhere near ready to perform like it's going to. And as a younger hedge, the roots are still getting established. Some of the strength on some of the stems is not where it should be. You got a bit of a pendulous habit, the branches going everywhere. And then it's just a matter of those stems becoming a little more mature, and then it'll completely turn around for you. They'll be very erect. They'll have the look that you're hoping to have. So it's just youth as a younger hedge right now that's all that's changing that. And your question, when to prune it, I would say as soon as we start seeing a little bit of new growth happen in the spring, it's usually about April, then I would do some pruning. I tend to prune a little harder than I should, Ben, because I want to push up really strong stems from the bottom, but that's when I would do that. And I can assure you it's going to have a much better look than it has right now.
Okay, thank you. Then a really quick second follow-up. Last year during one of the snows we had, the snow really weighed down the plant, and some of the stems completely, they almost look like they bent over 90 degrees. Is that something I should prevent? Should I be shaking the snow loose from the plant, or should I just let it be?
Yeah, Ben, when we get a wet, heavy snow, it's a problem. And last year was a tremendous year for the cold and the snow. But, I always use a broom. And I go up from the bottom to the top to just shake it off and so on like that, because when it sits for a long period of time, it does really spoil the shape of the thing. So if you can be out there when it's really snowing or just after it snowed and get that cleaned up, then that would be great.
Thank you, Ben, for that.
Amazing.
And
thank you.
You know what? I let him sneak in that second question because that's something that I'm always concerned about with my bamboo. So thank you for that, Ben and Brian. We'll head now to Claire in Vancouver. Claire, you have a question about amaryllis.
Good afternoon,
Good
everyone.
afternoon.
Hi.
Brian. You're my number in my top 5 reasons to listen to CBC. Sorry, I'd have to say maybe even closer to 1.
He's number 1 for a lot of people, Claire.
I have a question about my amaryllis. I got one a few years ago that was a very small bulb. It didn't do much for a very long time. Then I repotted it and put it outside last summer. And, it just went wild. It loved the sun. And so now I brought it in. The leaves are still looking very green, but I don't know if it's going to flower or if it has to go into dormancy again.
Yeah, Claire, really good question. I'm glad you did that because that revives them, brings them back. But because they keep on growing, they're quite happy being outside. Now's the time to bring the whole container inside. I would put it in a cool, dark area, even a closet if you have nowhere else to stop watering it. Let all the goodness and those leaves start to shrivel up and go back into the bulb. And so just leave it alone, no water, let it shrivel up naturally. And then when it starts doing that, you can cut the leaves off right back to the bulb. Only when they've gone a bit of brown color, they've lost that rich green. And just be a little bit patient. Give it about a month to cure itself. And they're going to bloom, but just going to be later this year, Claire.
Okay, so when I bring it out of dormancy, it's going to be inside. I won't be putting it outside, of course. So it will spring back. I'm assuming.
Oh, yeah, it will. And don't forget the best ones in the world right now are being grown in Brazil. Very, very hot climate and so on. I mean, they are an African amaryllis after all. But no, they great to have them outside this summer. They need just to shrivel up and dry up right now, have a bit of a rest, and then start them up. So I would expect, honestly, March or April for that plant to bloom beautifully for you.
All right.
Okay. And can I just ask what benefit are they getting through windows when windows have a coating on them?
Yeah, I think so. That's a good question. But the sunlight, quite frankly, compared to some of the the lighting we do have today, many different light forms and LEDs and so on for grow lighting. The sun that we're getting right now on a low angle, and I would keep it in a window. That's where a bright window, if you possibly can. That's enough for it to thrive and do very well. So it really doesn't need much, because once it's dormant, that everything it needs in that bulb is ready to bloom with or without light.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you for calling in, Claire. And we will take an email now from Rod and Christine. They write, we live in Windermere in the East Kootenays, Invermere. We have a plum tree that has been very prolific, but last year it suffered badly with winter kill. We pruned it back, but this year it struggled and bore no fruit. We noticed this fall the leaves have not fallen, maybe only 40%. Do we have a problem, and what should we do? Brian, I will leave that one to you.
Okay. No, I mean, in Invermere, usually most of our fruit trees will handle zone 4 and zone 5. So, but you get the occasional winter, like last year, was extremely cold, and it's going to do certain amounts of damage to the tree. The fact that it came into leaf and so on last year, and we found last year here in the valley, a lot of leaves, because we had an early frost, froze on the tree. That has no effect whatsoever. Eventually, those leaves will fall off and no problem. But the whole thing is with your plum tree, try and train the tree as it regrows where the branches go horizontally. If they go vertically, you don't get much fruit. Horizontal branches will start producing blossoms and subsequent fruit. So that's one thing, just getting more blossoms out there. Looking after the tree in the spring when it comes out, give it some nutrient around the drip line, like a 10, 15, 19. In the summertime, when we can water thoroughly and deeply. It's, first of all, getting the tree back into shape. And then once you're there, the tree is going to be absolutely fine. I'm glad it survived. Each year now it'll get better. And just so, again, training the branches in a horizontal fashion, that will get you the most blooms and subsequent fruit.
Love that. Training and a little TLC. And of course, you're more than welcome to join the show with your own questions for Brian. You can call us at 1-800-825-5950. You can also call locally, 604-669-3733. Email us, bctoday@cbc.ca. And we'll head out now to George in Rosslyn. Hi, George. Thanks for joining us today.
Yes. Hi, Brian.
Hi, George.
I would like to know about moles and how you get rid of them. They have completely wrecked my garden and lawns, and they've even dug under a concrete pad.
I know. George, they are only there to get grubs and worms out of your soil. And if you have a lot of grubs and worms in your soil, that's why your place. And I guess in looking at the big picture here, they getting under your and burrowing under your patio and stuff like that. That's a little bit of an issue. But normally, what we do, if we've had them in our gardens before, many people have them. I just simply leave them alone, George. I just rake over with a rake the soil back in, let it fill in. And when they've depleted enough grubs and worms where they're hard to find, they're going on to another property. But we've never had an issue. You can, if it's just becoming a problem for you repeatedly, there are mole traps out there, and which are effective, I guess, in terms of you have to be very patient. In terms of getting them. There's also been sonic attachments that we put in the ground, and they make a bit of a sound but it only works for a short period of time. It doesn't work for a longer period of time. We've had listeners on the program before who said it worked not badly for them, but they're sonic type of repellents. And but basically, if you want to be honest with you, we're in a new world where we don't trap things or kill things as much anymore. But essentially, a mole trap is the only way to be able to control them. And they, at this point here, but again, they're going to be diminished over the winter. And if they've actually taken a lot of grubs and worms out of your soil, they're going to be less inclined. They're going to probably move on by spring, George.
Okay.
Wish you the
Thank
best.
you very much for the advice.
Okay.
We wish you and your mole friends the
Good luck.
best. Whether they move on or you just become friends with them, and it's one big happy family. You may have problems yourself with moles or other pests in the garden. Perhaps you want to know what to do now that the frost has been on the ground in the mornings, and if you need to do stuff to get your garden winter ready, just call us at 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Our master horticulturalist, Brian Minter, is always here every other Friday to answer all of those questions. We did receive an email from Maggie in Armstrong, and she writes, "What should I do with my begonia that I grew indoors this summer as I had no shade outside? It's always been very leggy. Now it's almost 3 feet tall and very few flowers." Brian, what do you recommend for her leggy begonia?
Yeah, and thanks for the question. There are so many different types of begonias, so I'm not quite sure what variety we have here. But I will say one thing about them, whether it's a tuberous one, and if it has a tuber in the bottom, even started from seedlings in 1 year, they form a tuber by the end of the season. Basically cut it back. At this point here, don't let it die down. Just cut it right back very, very hard to the soil level. If it's a tuberous type, if it's one of the Selena types or, begonia, the Rieger types, simply prune it back hard, because she's right. They do get very leggy, especially when they lose light. And so I would prune it back to about 4 to 6 inches. They will regenerate new growth out of the old stems. They will also regenerate new growth out of the bottom, out of the roots, and they'll come up. So a good hard pruning right now is the best thing. Put it in an east or north window where they get indirect light, and run it as dry as a bone. Begonias love to be dry. That's the secret with them. And so that's whether it's a tuberous type or one of the Rieger types. That's the way to handle it right now.
All right. Thank you for answering that. And Brian, just very quickly, what are some of the biggest mistakes that people do make at this time of year when we start to see that frost on the ground?
Oh, okay. The absolute number one is we're going to clean up the garden.
Okay.
So we prune everything back. And my goodness, all the flowers that are set to bloom for our hydrangeas in the spring, gone. All the forsythia buds, gone.
Right.
All the flowering shrubs. Anything that's a flowering shrub right now, basically leave it alone unless it flowers on new wood, like the traditional PG hydrangeas or regalias and that type of thing. So careful on pruning off the flowers. That's certainly number one. And I think the other thing, too, is ironically, letting things get out of hand. A good exercise is to walk around your home and around your garden. Are the trees in proportion to your landscape? Are some of the evergreens getting too big? Are they spreading out, overcovering your sidewalk and onto the driveway and so on? So a wise pruning in terms of those types of things are really, really important. And, from an environmental perspective, I've talked to so many folks in urban forestry, Amy. The thing is, any larger trees we have around our home, they're absolutely gold. They're precious. So our larger trees kind of just, keep them in good shape, look after them. But it takes a smaller tree a long time to be able to match what they do in terms of the environment. So those are a few things that I think are really important.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And we do have a call now from Brecken in Richmond. Hi, Brecken. Thanks for calling in. What's your question for Brian?
Hi there. Hi, Brian.
Hi.
I'm wondering, for the last 3 or 4 years, I've had little bits of the cottony scale on a small red Japanese cutleaf maple. And until this year, it looked like little bird droppings on the leaves. I ignored it. But this year, the whole plant, the woody parts are totally covered. And I've noticed a lot of dead branches as well. And I'm wondering just how to approach this. Get rid of it.
Yeah, it sounds, and thank you for that too, because other folks are in the same situation. I would really love you to get some horticultural oil, and you have to be careful because we always, at this time of year, talk about dormant spraying to keep the insect population, the disease out of our trees. One of the ones you don't use oil on are Japanese maples, just so we know. But if you use the instead of the dormant ratio, if you look at the growing season ratio, which we can use all through the summertime, it is very, very important. So I would use it, when it's not freezing hard, go out and because what this oil does, it's very light, it's organic, and it seals over all the mealybug out there and scaled insects as well. It covers both, which I love. So the growing season ratio, if you can see them at this time of year, let's get it on. I would say about every 5 to 7 days. If you can get them 3 sprayings when it's not frozen out there at the growing season ratio, that should really help you get rid of that problem.
So should I really soak all the woody parts of the plant, basically?
Yeah, I would. In terms of spraying, you ask a very good question. We always spray to runoff. That means we use a fine mist as we use a pressure sprayer. But when it starts to drip on it starts to drip a wee bit on the branches, that's when you stop at that point.
Okay. Thank you very, very much. Appreciate it. Great.
You're welcome. Good luck.
All right, Brian, any final thoughts before we leave you for the afternoon?
Well, one thing that I'm really looking forward to is the food bank day next week today.
Yes, we are all looking forward to it.
So we need the support of all our CBC listeners next Friday. That's very, very important. But I think the most thing right now in terms of, we live in a new world today. Any of the planting that can be done this time of year is really important in terms of adding, any plant we put in. It's no longer about just the plant. It's about its effect on wildlife, its potential for pollinators, the carbon sequestration, producing oxygen, cooling, and all those sorts of things. So if we're thinking about our yard, take a look when you are walking around. What else can we use? Plants are such an important thing, and as things are dormant right now, and also taking a look at the winter color. So many plants make a beautiful display, whether it's beautiful stems like the shrub dogwoods at this time of year, some of the flowers to lift our spirits, all the viburnum pink dawns, for example, and some of the winter flowering camellias. They're putting out when it's 10 degrees, the pollinators are out, so it provides pollen for them. So looking to add value to our landscape, not only from our point of view, but from the environmental and bird populations as well. Those are just really super important things.
Well, thank you. Always a pleasure, Brian. Enjoy your sunny weekend.
Okay, Amy.
Okay,
Thank
take
you.
care.
We'll see you next week at the
You
food
bet.
bank.
You
Okay.
bet. That is horticulturist and master gardener joining us from Brian Minter, of course, joining us from Chilliwack. And that's it for our show today. Thanks to our team here on the show: Rachel Adams, Alan Regan, George Baker, Masheed Hadid, Bradley Stewart, and Greg Kisser. Thanks as well to Jake Costello, Amar Parmar, Sally Lee, David Jones, and Megan Zwick. I'm Amy Bell. Thank you for joining us, and Michelle Eliot will be back on Monday. I hope you have a wonderful weekend.